All right. So we are honored today to have an amazing member of our community that I have enjoyed getting to know a little bit over this last year, Rolondo Talbott, who serves this community in a variety of ways. One way is that he is on the police commission. And so that's going to be part of what he's updating us about. There have been a lot of community requests of the police commission and a lot more involvement than there has been in the past over this last year. And the commission has done a lot of work. And so it's going to be a great update for all of you to hear what's been going on so that you can spread the word about different projects that are happening. I'm going to stop that screen share. And then he's also been working on here in the city of Claremont with the school district, what's called the District Advisory Committee on Racial Equity. And so that is an important group that has started that he's going to be providing updates on, as well as just other equity initiatives in the city. And what I want to emphasize is while Rolondo's here in Claremont, while our church is here in Claremont, that what we're talking about today is a great model for other communities. So I know that a lot of you live outside of Claremont. And so what we talk about today can be used in your cities as well, as we try to strive for greater equity in all the cities around our area. So thank you, Rolondo, for being with us today. We are so honored to have you. Floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me back and giving this opportunity to sort of update you all. It's funny, I was thinking about the last time we spoke in a forum like this was back in July of last year. So it's been a while. And as I was saying earlier, I'm going to try to condense about 9 months worth of work that's been happening around the city and within this hour that we have together. But I did just want to start off and say, a big thank you, obviously, to you all for being here. I'm reminded of when my wife and I moved into Glendora from Orange County, and we always had kind of our eye on moving to Claremont and just enjoyed the city. And besides the need of finding a house that meets our needs and great school districts for our kids, we were really interested in finding a place that had a great sense of community, not just the, taking your trash cans when you're out of town or pick up your mail type of community, but an environment that really, was interested in making the city as best as it could for everybody in the city. And so when we moved here, we felt that when we first moved to Claremont. And then I think over time, as we kind of talked about last time, I think we started to see where there's places in the city that can be improved and certain things that we can work on to make the city even more inclusive. And so we had a great conversation last time about, my personal take as being a person of color within Claremont and kind of, what my thoughts were in accordance to my experiences. And we talked about, the things that were happening in the police commission to kind of help make the city more inclusive and things like that. And so, again, I just want to thank all of those of you that are out there that are watching and are attending today for just being part of those conversations, to lending your voice in these spaces, your expertise in these different areas, your opinions, your solutions. That's really what's motivating me to do this type of work. That's what really inspires me to do this type of work is the folks in this community and beyond, really, that are all interested in making the city of Claremont, a better city for everybody in here. So again, thank you for this opportunity and thank you for this space to kind of do this work and to have these conversations. I'm also reminded, from a faith-based perspective and being a Christian, it's very important that we do this work. And as I was reflecting kind of this morning, if you'll indulge me, because I always like to tie this back to, really the core of what, this is all about. I was reading this morning and I was kind of taking a look back in 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10 and 11, where Peter's talking to the early Christians of the church. And he basically is telling them, he says, each one of you, or each one, should use whatever gift he has received to serve others, faithfully administering God's grace in various forms. If anyone speaks, he should do it as one speaking the very words of God. If anyone serves, he should do it with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. To him be the glory and power forever. Amen. So I think about those things when I'm actually doing this type of work, that's actually something that Peter was instructing the early church. And that aligns really nicely for me when you turn to Luke chapter 6, verse 38, where Jesus is saying, given it shall be given unto you, a good measure pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured into your lap. For will the measure you use, it will be measured to you. And so I think about, when I think about God's blessings, I think that the service that I'm doing is directly tied to those blessings that God has given me. So as we kind of talk about these, these updates that I give you, I would just challenge you to think about other ways that you can continue to serve. So if you are serving right now, maybe there's other opportunities. If you're thinking about service in the community, we can talk about it after the updates, and I can give you a couple of ideas and areas where we could use some help of service. But I just like to keep that always in the back of my mind that yes, I do this work to better my family and to better Claremont for my children, but it's really more of adherence to what God's word is saying, and the way I see it affect my life. So with that, I wanted to kind of start by just recapping everybody kind of on our first conversation, and I'll kind of go into some other updates. But when we first talked back in July, this was really on the heels of the murder of George Floyd. And we were having these kind of conversations, and our police commission meeting that happened back in July was actually, I think, one of the longest commission-based meetings in the city of Claremont, which was just shy of about 5 hours. But what we heard in that conversation, it was really great conversation. It was a lot of feedback from the public, and just in terms of just their thoughts and feelings, but primarily about policing in Claremont. What really came out of that was this desire to reach back out into the community as commissioners, as police commissioners, and really get to understand more deeply what the concerns are of the community. We recognize that there was quite a bit of a misconception of what the police commission was and what it did. And so we saw that as an opportunity to help the public understand, that we're here to serve the community and in our relations with the police department and what we can do in those capacities. But I think more importantly, it was an opportunity for us police commissioners to hear from all of you in terms of what you like to see in terms of changes and things that you thought were working well in the community. And so at the time, I launched a subcommittee out of the police commission called the Community Outreach Committee. And it was really our role to speak to folks like you, to do a bunch of different public forums, reach out to individuals, and really, again, just collect that data that would help inform us on what to do. And I would say we had maybe about easily 50 plus hours worth of conversations and dozens of folks that we met to get this information. And what sort of came out of that was this agreement amongst us police commissioners that we needed to set up really intentional groups to look at these different issues that were being brought up, that needed to be delved in a little bit deeper than what we could do in a traditional police commission meeting. And so what we did is we set up a couple of what we call ad hoc committees, which are just groups of commissioners that can work together to, again, look deeper into a particular issue and then report back out to the community and the commission at large and make recommendations for the city and the police department. And so we took the next couple of months to sort of do that. And there were a number of different committees that we set up. But one of the committees or one of the things I should say that we realized was that there was a lot of work for us to do as volunteers. We all have full-time jobs and careers, and we're parents and things like that. And so we really recognized that we needed more people. At the time, the commission was only about 7 individuals. It was all men at the time. And so we recognize that not only did we need greater diversity within the police commission, but we also just needed more people. There was a lot of work to do. And so we introduced 2 new members later that fall of 2020 to the police commission, which extended our commission to 9 members. So we included Becky Margiata, who's a parent in Claremont and a business owner. And then also Dr. Rafiq Mohammed, who's the dean of behavioral sciences, social and behavioral sciences at Cal State University, San Bernardino, and also Claremont resident. And so by extending the commission from 7 to 9 people, what that really did was give us the opportunity to tackle more issues and do so in a way that provided transparency and engagement with the public. So that was a really big increase for the commission and a really big increase in our capabilities to really tackle some of these issues. The next thing that we did after that was we took a look at each of the sort of core concerns that we heard across the community. And those were ranging from, more transparent policing policies, policing in our schools, which we'll talk about in a little bit more. But one of the first things that we heard was, how does the public better interact with the police department, specifically in those times where feedback has to be given to the police department, or maybe even a complaint has to be filed against the police department. So prior to this conversation, if you wanted to file a complaint against the police department, you would either have to come into the police department and get one of their paper forms and fill it out and describe the incident that you experienced and things like that, or you had to maybe email the police department directly or some sort of way around that. And so what we heard from the community, especially from people of color, was this was problematic. If you were going to make a complaint against the police department or wanted to provide them with feedback, the going into the police department was not an ideal situation, and it wasn't very clear once I file this police complaint, where does it go? Does it even get attention? Is it going to be used against me in the community? And so we had to answer a lot of those type of questions and concerns in the community. And so what we did is we embarked upon a project to create basically an online form or digital version of that police complaint form or feedback form. And what that did was a couple of things. One, it provided the accessibility for folks who didn't feel comfortable going into the police department to fill out a police complaint form or email. It gave them a way to do that right from their computer or their phone. It gave also people the ability, once something actually happened that they wanted to have documented, they could go and do that almost immediately. They didn't have to wait in order to get a paper form to do that. It also gave the opportunity for those who were inclined to upload photos of whatever they experienced or videos and things like that. It gave them that opportunity to do that where we didn't have that in the past. And also, and I think most importantly, is it provided the transparency that the community was looking for in that entire process. And so when you go and submit an online complaint form, now you get a confirmation that you've submitted it. You get an idea of what the process is like in terms of the investigation. And it's important for the public to know that each one of those, every time there's feedback given or there's a complaint filed, that actually does come to commissioners for us to review once the department has had an opportunity to investigate further. So there is accountability on the police department side and the commission side to look into these matters and to resolve them. And so that was a really big accomplishment, I think, for the police department and for the city at large to make this process a bit more accessible and transparent. And so that was one of the things that we heard from the community and we implemented for the community. The next sort of big issue that we had to tackle really was policing in schools. And I'm going to give a little presentation here, mainly just to keep my sanity and keep my thoughts on track, because I'm more of a visual person anyway, as I suspect most of us are. But really where we went with policing in schools was this was brought to us as part of these community conversations directly from students, primarily from Claremont High School, who really told us, you need to look into how particularly students of color are being policed on our campuses. And, and I'll be honest, I wasn't very familiar with the issue. My children aren't old enough to be in high school yet, so I was very unfamiliar with the dynamic between the police department and the high school. But what these students were telling us was definitely enough to convince us as commissioners to, again, form another small group of commissioners to take a look at this issue and to understand what these concerns are and really understand policing in the city of Claremont. So one of the first things we did is we asked the police department to just educate us in the community. What consists of policing in Claremont and to give us a presentation. And so I'm going to kind of run through these slides. I'll preface this by saying I'm going to run through this pretty quickly But all the information and the slides and data and things like that are publicly accessible on the police department site, or you can always email me. I'll put my email in the chat here shortly. And I can give you that information. So I'll apologize in advance for going through this quickly, but if you do have questions, I think we can take those towards the end if that's okay. So let's try this technology out here and see if this works. So ask for a thumbs up when you can see my slides. All right. And you can still see me, right? So I'm just going to transition here. Everybody still got the slides? All right, cool. So in September, the Police Commission asked the department to provide a presentation on what the role of policing is in the Claremont Unified School District at large, but primarily in Claremont High School. And the presentation basically outlined the roles and responsibilities. It did provide some baseline statistics and really gave us a good sense of sort of the overview. But what was interesting is when we took public comment, it was clear that that wasn't going to be enough to just understand. We had to actually get in and dig into the data. And that's what I mentioned, forming this sort of ad hoc committee to look deeper into the role of policing in our school district. So the first thing we had to understand was, what is a resource officer, which is the police officer that works with Claremont Unified. And so the easiest way to explain this is a school resource officer is a sworn officer that has received additional training in working with children and working within schools. Most SROs, as we call them, are usually visible figures by wearing their uniform and walking around schools and interacting with students. They investigate. You can see kind of some of their generalized roles. But one of the interesting things about just the school resource program in this country is that there isn't really any distinct and specific guidelines for how a school resource officer conducts themselves. Those are usually either department driven or in some sort of relationship with the school district. But there isn't sort of any governing body that we see with policing as at large, where usually the Department of Justice in a state or the National Department of Justice has regulations for police officers. When it comes to school resource officers, those sort of guidelines and rules are a little bit more local to meet the needs of the particular schools. So we wanted to dig even deeper and understand, well, how does the school resource officer program, how did that come about in Claremont? And so one of the things that we looked at was, sort of the overall history. And what we saw is that the school resource officer program started in about 2000, shortly after the Columbine incident, where a lot of schools were looking at how do we better protect our students so that we don't have a Columbine incident in our school district. And so in the early 2000s, Claremont Unified actually got a grant that was going to fund this role for initially 3 years. And I think after that initial 3 years and seeing some success in the program, the district, along with the city, decided to fund this position a bit more permanently. And so it's been in place for quite some time now within Claremont Unified School District. So when we talked to the chief of police and kind of understood this a little bit better, we wanted to understand, okay, so what is really the city's position on the school resource officer? And you can kind of see what was quoted to us here. But really, this was an opportunity for this program to educate students, to help prevent crime and illegal behavior within the school district, and obviously to implement prevention strategies and the like. And looking at specifically kind of what the program details, you can kind of see here, this is a list of what the major roles of the school resource officer is meant to do within the district. So in order to better understand kind of the perspective on this, we again reached out to the community. We wanted to understand, what were people's thoughts on the school resource officer? We understand how this position came about. We understand what it's meant to do, but we wanted to understand what the public thought about it. And was there a disconnect? Was there some misalignment in perceptions? What exactly was the thought about the school resource officer? So at the time, we had the opportunity to meet with those folks who are running for the school board at the time. So we met some of the school board candidates. We met with the superintendent and the principals of Claremont High School and of El Roble Middle School. We met with a number of different both political and just community-based figures throughout the city. And all in all, that was about I think about maybe 14 hours worth of conversation, plus multiple public comments that we would get during police commission meetings. And there's a community feedback that I'll talk about a little bit later in this presentation, but we also launched a survey just to kind of make sure that we talk to everybody that we possibly could around the community to understand this issue a little bit better. So we got a lot of great feedback from the community, and what we heard what we were hearing from the community was, kind of twofold. I think there were some in the community that really felt that, the safety of our public schools was of utmost importance. The safety of our teachers and our administrators was very important, and the school resource officer provided that safety. But then we also heard about concerns about policing in schools and the effect that it had on children, specifically children of color. And so we really needed to understand that a little bit more and understand kind of, is there a way where, we can ensure the safety of our children in our schools, but then also address the concerns primarily of children of color when it comes to policing in schools. So fundamentally, what the students had asked us to do, and fundamentally was the question that we were left with, is this position actually effective? Is, what we've defined as the SRO's role, is that actually happening? And what we've discovered through, talking about this and looking at data and doing, again, almost 9 months worth of research into this subject, was that it's very subjective. The enforcement that SROs have, the roles that they play, it can differ from school to school, it can differ from district to district. So it's very specific for the environment. But one of the things that we did find that was a bit striking to us as police commissioners was this concept of net widening. And you can kind of see the definition there, but basically the way I summate it is that the more of a lens that you put on the use of police in these spaces, the more you're going to have arrests, the more you're going to use police in ways that maybe they weren't initially intended. You could see sort of the evolution when you look at the history of the school, of school resource officers, where they were meant to do, very specific things. You rarely even seen them to now. If there's a disagreement on campus, the school resource officer is called. So it's, yeah, I see. Am I freezing or? Question. Yeah.
Yeah, the screen is still on slide 1.
Oh, it's still on slide 1. Okay, let's see. Maybe my share. Oh, you know what? It looks like I was paused. There we go. How's that?
Perfect.
Are you back with me now? Okay. Yep. Sorry about that. I think when I switched slides, I might have paused it. So everybody can see the effectiveness of the SRO. Okay, cool.
Excellent.
So I'll give everybody a second to catch up with me in terms of the definition of net widening. But again, the idea is just, if we introduce more policing into an environment, is there more of an effect of policing in the environment? And so what we found is that, we could see evidence of that when we looked at the data from other school districts where they've had, a longer history of school resource officers. And so the question was, is something like that, can that be replicated, or do we experience that in Claremont? And another thing that we were concerned about in looking at the data was this sort of the school to prison pipeline. I think most of us are familiar with, and is having an SRO in our schools, does that not only push that, but accelerate that further, especially for our children of color? And then lastly, what is the impact on our students with disabilities? Both physical and learning, and is having a police officer in the schools interacting with these students, does that then affect them in certain ways? And so that was really sort of our charge when looking at the efficacy of the school resource program. Okay, so you should have seen the slides just change. I see. Okay, cool. So we wanted to, again, look deeper into it. And what we basically found is that not only is there not a lot of data on the effectiveness of school police or policing in our schools, there's actually the opposite. There is a lot of data that suggests that there is a lack of efficacy in these programs in different cities within the country. So you can see kind of a couple of studies that we looked into that kind of talked about this. But we did see that districts that had SROs had more suspensions, more expulsions, particularly of students of color. We saw the criminalization and arrests of youth for minor behaviors. We're talking things like truancy, or maybe, possessions of small amounts of marijuana and things like that. And so that was concerning to us. But again, we wanted to understand how that then correlated here in the city of Claremont. We looked specifically into the trauma that is experienced by our students of color. A lot of our students of color, and I don't see Claremont as being that different here, but when we look kind of nationally in different school districts, we have a lot of children of color who outside of the school experience a lot of trauma in interacting with the police officers, but then come on campus and are told that police officers are there to help you and to assist you. And so this presented sort of a disconnect for a lot of students that say, the moment I step off campus, my life is in danger. I experience trauma by my interactions with police. So why is it any different when I'm on campus? And so those are all the sort of things that we were looking into when picking apart this issue a little bit more. But again, we wanted to understand specifically the experiences that children in Claremont were having, and to see if that aligned with what we were seeing from a national perspective in some of our other local school districts. So we sought out to hear from the Claremont Student Equity Coalition, which was a group that you can see here of a bunch of different student groups within primarily Claremont High School. And we asked them to give us a presentation on their perspective, because it was really important to us that as we looked at this national data and we started to focus more on Claremont High School, that there was a safety component, but this safety component was mainly coming from teachers and administrators within the district. But we wanted to then center this conversation really on the students, who are the ones that are directly impacted by how these SRO interacts with the school district. And so we really wanted to understand from their perspective, what their thoughts are. And so we asked the Claremont Student Equity Coalition to come to the police commission meeting and present their data, their perspectives. And they gave a really great presentation. And again, I apologize for not including it all here because we're on limited time, but that is available in our meeting minutes. And it's a lot of data, but it's really good data. It's insightful data that's available. So again, if you can't find it, I'll put my email and I can certainly email it to you. But really, in hearing their perspective, we wanted to understand, what are the things that they recommend, or what are the things that they see that would make, being a student in Claremont not only more equitable, but help them thrive and flourish. So they gave us a number of suggestions, and I'm just going to highlight a couple of them, because ultimately, as a police commission, what our charge will be at the end of this is to come forth with our own recommendations that we'll submit to both the city and the school district. And so I just want to pause here and make something clear, that as police commissioners, when it comes to policing in schools, really what we're doing is we're providing recommendations based off of our our research, and looking into the policing aspect of being in schools. But really the ultimate sort of decision on where policing in schools goes is going to really come from the school district and the city working in partnership with the police department. And so from our perspective as commissioners, we play a role in really providing this research and providing these spaces for people to make comments and to hear from the community. And so this is part of what we are interested in looking into. And so the students were really interested in providing solutions that really centered their experience and centered sort of a process that helps them grow when mistakes are going to be made, or when there's issues within the high school that they need to address. And so one of the interesting alternatives that they presented was the idea of these community intervention workers, which was using sort of the idea, the way I kind of understand it is using the community to help solve these problems. So bringing in, Claremont is rich in experts in a lot of different areas. and the relationship with the colleges is amazing, and really bringing in those experts to help come up with alternative solutions when there are issues that need to be addressed. And so I thought that was a really interesting suggestion. They also looked in areas of restorative justice coordinators. So looking at bringing those students together, those students who maybe have perpetrated something with those students who experience either violence or what have you within the schools, and really bringing them together in that sense of community and help resolving the issue and moving forward, which is, you know, another idea that we're seeing sort of permeate across the country when we look at some of the ways that those districts that did remove school resource officers sought to still provide safety for the schools. There's also suggestions in behavioral interventionists, social workers being part of the schools, peer mediators. But really what I think it all comes down or boils down to is the students' desires to really have more resources when it comes to things like mental health, more resources when it comes to things like social work to help provide, you know, the things that students are really needing. Because I think from the students' perspective and from ours as well, you know, when we look at, you know, things like safety, it's often the result of something that maybe could have prevented earlier, right? So when we look at statistics on, you know, drug use or things like truancy, we see those as indicators of a problem that can be addressed a lot earlier. Maybe it's mental health, maybe it is something that a social worker is more apt to deal with. And so I think really our focus when we start to formulate some of these recommendations is looking at what we can do preventatively to help provide safety for the high school. So next steps for us as a commission, our last commission meeting at the beginning of March, we talked about this survey. So we launched a survey over the holidays and in through the month of January, because again, we wanted to make sure we did receive some feedback from the community that, you know, we wanted to ensure that we were able to include as many voices in this conversation as possible. So we did launch a survey and we collected about 1,200 responses, just shy of 1,300 responses from the community on their feelings about policing in the community. And so we've spent the past 2 months really analyzing that data. We actually brought in some PhD students to kind of help us, and this is going to go way over my head, but they're doing this really deep analysis in both sentiment analysis, which is looking at the comments that people have submitted and really pulling data out of it, and then actually using artificial intelligence and machine learning to then pull out even more learning. So they're doing amazing things, but we have a presentation in April that will give the community the analysis from that. And that'll be sort of our last step as a commission towards giving our recommendations, which we hope to have presented in May to the community. And so again, we'll be presenting that. That'll be discussed by us police commissioners and then ultimately sent forward to the school district and the city to then make the final decisions on where this goes. So that's kind of you know, again, it's kind of 9 months jammed in about 30 minutes. So I hope I didn't go too far. And we can take some questions here in a second, but I also wanted to kind of share, you know, my other passion that's been happening in the city, and that's really in the area of sort of racial equity, specifically within our schools. And so at about the same time as the police commission was looking at policing within our schools, the district really took on the task of looking at racial equity across the board throughout Claremont Unified School District. And so the decision was made to form this district advisory committee on racial equity. So I have a couple of slides to go on that. And so I'll look for some, I'm going to stop my share here and pull up a different presentation here that kind of goes into that. So give me a second here. All right, we should be seeing my other presentation. So thumbs up for me when you can see that presentation. All right, awesome. This work is 2 for 2 on technology today. All right, so so the idea here with we call it the DAC, but the District Advisory Committee on Racial Equity, was to really again look very intentionally into racial equity across the school district, and determine where changes can be made. Looking at a bunch of different areas. And so the district reached out to the community and asked for volunteers to be part of this work, and feeling sort of a need to be a part of this conversation, and given sort of my experience in policing in schools and the research that we've done thus far, I volunteered for this as well, and I was selected to be part of this DAC. And so I'm going to go through a couple of slides just talking about, what it is and kind of the work that we're doing. And then again, I'll talk about a couple of other racial equity opportunities that we have going on in the city. But really, again, I just want to challenge everybody to think about different ways that you can participate in this conversation, because really, as much brain power as we're putting into this, it's really going to be a community effort to help solve these issues. And so that's why I call on all of us to sort of give our input into this, because I think it's very valuable. But you can see here that, it was a committee that was put together to help ultimately inform the district and the Board of Education on looking at issues that impact historically marginalized students. We think about our BIPOC students within the district, and our students with disabilities. There's a couple of goals that I'm going to read here. Again, this is all on the district's website. I can provide links, but the basic idea here is that, we really want to look at the historical impact and purpose of public education and really understand that. We want to look at the role that educators actually have in interrupting these equities that exist in our schools today. And we really want to help provide recommendations to these educators on how they can do this racial equity work within their classroom and throughout the district. And so we have a couple of outcomes that I'm going to flip here. Before I can get to this, though, you can kind of get a sense of the members of the DAC. So it's school administrators, it's teachers, it's members from the community, it's educators that are here. The folks that are in bold, we just did a presentation for the district earlier this week, or last week, I should say. And I had an opportunity to sort of brief the board on kind of what we're doing from my perspective in terms of the DAC, which I'll go into here in a little bit. But we have the interim superintendent, we have members of the board. So there's a large group of us that are looking into this, and we're being facilitated right now by a group that does this racial equity work in schools. And they're really helping shepherd us through this process and giving us a lot to think about as we do this sort of work. But you can kind of see here what our sort of phased approach is and what our outcomes will be. And so, we really want to, evolve and align a clear definition of equity in the district, and look at those policies and make recommendations on maybe where there were inequities and help sort of resolve those. And ultimately what we want to do, and the goal of this, is really to develop what we call a racial equity impact plan, which is going to have very defined steps to improving racial equity within the district. So we've had a couple of meetings thus far, and what we basically were able to do was pull our group into three sort of main areas of concentration as we develop this racial equity impact plan. And so the three subcommittees that were developed were the academic achievement. So this is looking at racial equity in racial inequity and developing racial equity in academic achievement. We also have one that's looking specifically in the staffing aspect. So that's providing training for staff. I think, as most of us might know, we currently do not have any teachers of color in Claremont High School. So it's going to be looking at how we recruit and retain that type of talent in our high school. And then lastly is the safety, discipline, and school climate, which is the committee that I'm on, that's looking specifically into the SRO program, and school climate. So the exciting thing for me is that I get to work on this issue of policing in schools from a police perspective or a police commission perspective, but then I also get to work on this issue as a parent and as a member of the community. So it provides me with this really kind of unique perspective and ability to sort of have my voice in both of these spaces. And so it's an exciting time right now because there's a lot of good work that's being done. But you can see here kind of what the plan is going to include. So again, it's going to create some short and long-term goals. The role of each committee is to identify some of the challenges that exists, and then to engage the community, which is what we're doing here today, to collect data and then ultimately lead to those strategies of solving these inequity issues within the district. So in my particular area, I just wanted to kind of give you a couple of highlights of what we're doing when it comes to safety, discipline, and school climate. So in my particular group, we have about 3 members that are actually teachers, and then we have myself and another who are parents of children within the district. So it's a really good mix of both sort of a community and parenting perspective, along with an administrative and teaching perspective when looking at these type of issues. So one of the things that we really wanted to look into first was understanding sort of the data around school discipline practices, understanding things like suspension rates and expulsion rates as it pertains to the different schools within the district, and really looking at it from a racial equity lens. Are we seeing, for example, more Black students being suspended or expelled than as proportion to their percentage in the district, right? We're looking at those type of issues. What are they being expelled and suspended for? Those type of things is the kind of data that we're pulling apart. We're also looking at, this relationship of the SRO and how that factors into it. Do we see the SRO citing students of color disproportionately than maybe white students, for example? And what does that look like, and what effect is that happening? And then we're also looking at the support services that are being offered to students when these type of things happen. So is counseling being offered to students? How frequent is that counseling? Is it adequate counseling? All that type of data is what we're starting to pull apart. One of the things that we did that was also interesting is we reached back out to that Claremont student coalition group and actually had them and brought them in to help us better understand from their perspective how we can be effective as members of the DAC. So again, we've got it on the police commission side, but also on this DAC side, we were able to have those kind of conversations. And so that work is still ongoing. We're actually having these conversations, we're meeting with groups, and really what our goal is to help develop a plan that's going to help bring that racial equity into these different spaces and submit that to the district, which we hope by the end of the semester and around the May timeframe. So if you can kind of see the parallels here, May is going to be the same time that the police commission is going to give their recommendations. At or around the same time, the DAC is going to be giving their recommendations as well. So I think at the end of all of this, there'll be a really great opportunity to really have some, hopefully, really great recommendations that'll help move us forward as a community when it comes to these type of areas. Just a couple of other quick things that are happening because I'm clearly not busy enough, but we actually just launched, a lot of this work, even though we're looking at it from a district perspective, honestly, a lot of it is focused on the high school at the moment, but recognizing that this work needs to extend in other areas within the district. We've actually just recently started a similar effort at El Roble, the middle school, with a diversity and equity group that's working there that I'm a part of. As well as part of that team. And really what we're looking at the middle school level, because I have a middle schooler, so this is very personal to me as well, is, we're looking at those very similar issues when it comes to racial equity in the actual school. But this is a little bit different in that we're actually partnering with the teachers to help look at areas where maybe we can help provide training and provide professional development for those teachers who are interested in doing this work. And so we have a really great working relationship with the principal at El Roble, and we're just getting started in this work. So hopefully, in a couple of months' time, we'll have some really great wins, but we're already setting up meetings with teachers to kind of talk about what we can do as parents and as community members to help support them in this work. So it's really exciting that even at the middle school, we're starting to do this work. And then also, as many of you are familiar with, we have the Claremont Educational Foundation, which is a group that helps provide equity from a financial standpoint in the district. So they help provide funding, or they help provide gap funding, I should say, in the district that helps fund arts and music opportunities throughout the district. I'm a board member of that organization as well. And we've recently started a racial equity effort within that group to look at, from a funding perspective, how we support the district. How do we do that in a more equitable way? How do we ensure that the funds that we're able to provide, which we donated last year, I think just around $180,000 to the district to provide for this gap funding, but how can we do that in a more equitable way to help provide, to help close those gaps, I should say, and equity within the district. So there's a lot of amazing things going on. I was just able to give you just a couple, but I'm gonna take a break right here and answer any questions and drink a little bit of coffee because I feel my voice going hoarse. But I just wanted to, again, thank you all for listening and being a part of these conversations. I see so many familiar names that have, made public comment or have sent me emails or sent, these different commissions and boards and groups emails about their thoughts. And I just want to encourage this group to continue that great work and partnering with us to help move the city of Claremont forward. So I'm going to close my mouth for a second.
Incredible. Rolondo, this city is so blessed to have you part of it. Your family's awesome. All the work you're doing, all this volunteer work, you do so much, and we're grateful for that. So thank you for everything that you do. I know that I speak for everyone when I say that. We have some minutes for questions, and I'm sure we have a lot of questions. So if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand or just unmute yourself or put it in the chat, and we'll ask the question from the chat. I'll kick us off. I'm wondering, is there a topic that either the police commission or the DAC group is not talking about that you have thought to yourself, I really wish someone had brought this up, or I wish this topic was being discussed, but it's not. That's just kind of off people's radar that you think is important?
I do. Let's see, how do I say this? And I think this is actually probably a really great opportunity to get really the community's feedback. I'm challenged by a couple of notions when we have these kind of conversations, and I alluded to it a little bit earlier. When I think about these topics, I think about whose voices are we hearing and whose voices are we not hearing. And I think oftentimes, as humans, we tend to look at things from our own perspective, our own lived experiences, and I think that's totally normal. I think what the tricky part is taking ourselves out of that confine and looking at it from other perspectives and looking at it in a way to say, if I were in this position, how would I think these things would affect me? Or how would I think these things, what would be my thoughts about these things? And so when I sit in these spaces and I listen to a lot of feedback, I feel a lot of that's missing. I feel a lot of that empathy towards what people's lived experiences are missing. And that's not to say that, people's opinions aren't valid and the thoughts aren't valid, but there's two sides to it. There's what I think about things, and then there's also my ability to take myself out of myself and think about it from a different perspective. And so when you start doing that, you start asking yourself questions. And I think some of the questions that I'm having right now is we've heard a lot of impassioned talk and lived experiences from our students of color in these spaces. And yet the response seems to be, yeah, but, or, yeah, I feel that way. And so I'm challenged by, trying to figure out better ways of centering the voices of our students when we talk about these type of things. The students are literally crying out for more mental health resources. And unfortunately, some are dying because they don't have those mental health resources. But I don't feel like we're quite there yet to really center that as part of what we're looking at in terms of, just diving head deep into that. So I definitely think, in terms of what resources are offered to our children when it comes to these type of things, that mental health resource piece is really key. I mean, if you saw in some of my presentation, we don't really get into that. all that deep. And so I think that's something that I would like to definitely focus on. Again, because I just have nothing else better to do in my my daily life. I'm also part of the African American Family Wellness Committee that works with Tri-City Mental Health, that's looking at specifically African American children and families and how we can better provide mental health resources to support them in our community. And so I think that's one big area. Is I think, and if anything, this pandemic has really brought that front and center, that the need for mental health resources, not only for those in the community, but even taking care of ourselves, really needs to be centered. So that's something that's sort of really big on my radar right now.
Wow. Thanks, Rolando. It seems like when a student of color is saying, this is how I feel, this is my experience, the only answer should be, okay, well, let's respond to that rather than the yes, but. And just a note to the congregation, let's be thinking about that as a community. We were recently given this WISE designation, welcome, inclusive, supportive, and engaged on mental health. Let's live that out in the community. We're hearing these cries for more mental health resources. Other questions? There was one in the chat from earlier in your presentation, just a fact-based question. Do SROs carry firearms?
Yeah, they do. And that is something, again, that we've heard from students, particularly students of color, and particularly students who have experienced, witnessed, or had trauma with the use of firearms by police officers in their community. So they do. They're fully uniformed officers that are on campus that do carry firearms. So, that, again, that's something, when we think about sort of the recommendations and how we sort of address these concerns, that's something that we're looking at.
Peggy?
Thanks. Hi, Rolando. Thanks so much for coming back. This is great to close some of those loops and see where we're going. And I was so wonderful to see the research-based information being brought to some of the considerations. I'm just really thrilled with that. I was curious about one thing. You did mention moving into El Roble with some of these areas of focus, which is great. I wondered about younger children. Are there ways to begin there to teach children conflict resolution methods and and I don't mean the sort of squishy self-esteem things, but things that really give them tools to navigate with each other and helping them be able to resist joining in with crowd behavior. Seems like young children today, there's real potential there, and I wasn't sure if that's an area of focus as well.
Yeah, that is. And, again, I was moving so fast, I didn't get a chance to mention it. So yeah, as part of the DAC, we actually have a principal of one of our primary elementary schools as part of the committee that I'm on. That is definitely something that we're looking into. And then there's also another group that I belong to for Sycamore. Sycamore has their own diversity, inclusion, and equity group that I participate in as well. So yeah, we are starting to talk about, even at the primary school level, how do we address some of these issues? How do we sort of build that foundation that can extend throughout, students' careers in the school district? So yeah, it's really exciting work because, I do have a primary, my son is in elementary school too. So again, it's very personal for me to kind of look at these type of things. So yeah, I think it's real important to start at that elementary school level and do some of this work as well, so that we can then, by the time they get to Claremont High School, there's this tremendous foundation and sort of this equity work and really understanding how to solve these problems a lot better. So yeah, it's an exciting time. And that's why, again, I'll put the plug out, to get involved and help us kind of move these things forward. Because yeah, it's a really exciting time to do this type of work.
All right, we have time for another question if someone has one. Go ahead, Mel.
Nice presentation, Rolando. I've been in and out of the city and school district family master plan. I was on that group for several years, and my son attended the high school. The mental health issues have been very long, and there's been some progress with Tri-Cities. There's some progress with the students at Laverne and others. Do you sense that both the federal aid coming out of the COVID bill and the transition at the school board right now with a new superintendent, what are your hopes for better resourcing and priority of mental health at the school district?
Thank you for that question. I'm very optimistic. The movement that we're seeing right now, that I'm seeing right now, really does help. I think me talk about these type of things with an air of confidence. Again, as I said earlier, I do want to see, I would personally like to see that be centered a little bit more in these conversations, but I definitely know with the new school board members, that is top priority. I think, well, first reopening the schools or figuring that whole thing out is their current priorities, but I think, mental health is a very close second. And I just see a lot of new work, as I mentioned, this new African-American Family Wellness Committee that I'm on is something that's new. I see a lot of those type of things starting to creep up. And so I'm very optimistic. The only thing that concerns me is that in a lot of these spaces, we see the same faces. Me being one of them. So it does concern me a little bit that, I'm only one person. I'm pretty stretched thin these days. And I do care about my own mental health, and I need to take care of myself. And so that is my one kind of concern is that, we do see very similar people in these different spaces, and that I would definitely want to see and encourage, as these new things pop up, there be more broader participation from the community in these spaces. But yeah, I'm very optimistic that I think the ideas, and I don't know if it's one of these unintended consequences of the pandemic that sort of shed it more of a spotlight than ever on it, is the sense that I get. But yeah, definitely I get this sense that mental health is really being taken seriously and really being looked at very, very closely. So yeah, very optimistic. Thanks, Mel.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. And thank you again, Rolando. Shirley, thanks for that comment about a program that you've implemented. That's great. And yeah, Peggy, Rolando are 8 hours in each of his days. I think that would be great. We're just so grateful, Rolando, for all of your work. And thanks for that call to action. Your beginning scriptural lesson for all of us was, that was a sermon. And that was just a great message to all of us that we need all of our voices and all of our faces and all of our skills and gifts to be part of developing our communities. So worship begins in 2 minutes. The work doesn't end. So thanks for calling us to greater work and educating us on what's happening right now, Rolando. We're grateful.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Big round of applause.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.